Welcome. I'm Tim Kremer, Executive Director of the New York State School Boards Association. In this edition of Newsmaker, I will be having a conversation with New York State Education Commissioner MaryEllen Elia on a wide variety of education topics. Welcome back, Commissioner. It is budget time. We are all advocating for different amounts of money and different needs and different cost reductions and give us more flexibility. The joke here at NYSBA is I always say, just send more money and leave us alone.
Not how it always works.
It doesn't work that way. I don't think so. But I am curious to know what the Board of Regents and the State Education Department see as the priorities for state aid this year. What's your budget ask?
Well, the budget ask that was approved by the Board of Regents is $1.6 billion. We were very thoughtful. We had two co-chairs, Regent Odekirk and Regent Mead, who led that work group, and they came up with the recommendations. Clearly, the 1.6 was after much conversation on the constraints that New York is facing in funding right now in a number of areas. And so it's 1.6, it's 1.25 within the 1.6 that we are really calling for on foundation aid.
Good.
We are really supportive of maintenance of foundation aid and the concept of having foundation aid. And within that 1.25, we've requested that an $85 million set aside be part of that foundation aid. You may remember 2 years ago that began as set-asides within foundation aid when the governor and the legislature supported having community schools.
Yes.
And so we're asking for that for our ELL students. If you
Out
look
of
at
foundation aid?
out of the 1.25 request
Okay,
we have
all
for
right.
foundation aid, it's a set-aside.
Yeah.
It goes in as foundation aid, but it's one of those things that you just mentioned, you know, you'd like to have someone send the money but no strings.
Right.
Well, our issue really is that we're seeing in our data very clearly that our English language learners need to have additional support.
Well, this has always been a tough call for us because representing local control, if you will.
Sure.
And not everybody has English language learners, although most do. Not everybody wants the community school funding, although most do. But, and we appreciate that additional funding. We recognize the totality of it. But our philosophy as the School Boards Association has been, give us foundation aid, let us figure out where we're going to spend it. We'd prefer not to have the set-asides.
Well, and I certainly understand that. When we're looking at the data on performance and how well our students are doing across the state in things like our 3-8 assessments, our Regents exams, and ultimately our graduation rates, it's very clear that the group of English language learners need some additional support. So that is one way. And as you know, foundation aid already has a component in it for ELL students,
Right.
Which there is no guidance on how to use that.
Right.
So this would be a different portion cut out of foundation aid that we believe is really critical for our ELL students. To be honest, we've really tried to pull all of the agendas that the regents have, and as I said, our two co-chairs were very thoughtful about that with Chancellor and Vice Chancellor on making sure that the work that we're doing on ESSA, so basically we created our budget around equity, early learning, the ESSA, and the work that we're doing on accountability there, and efficiencies.
Yeah.
And so our budget and all of our requests for the legislature and the governor really revolve around those four characteristics.
Both houses have this committee that gets together regarding budget, and they hold hearings, and they put you on the hot seat for about 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I understand you performed remarkably, so congratulations on getting through that gauntlet one more time. But what I heard from the people, we were recently up on the Hill and advocating for our position, basically in line with the Educational Conference Board and running very close to what the Board of Regents, and well, I think we're on a kind of parallel tracks. But the idea, we were calling for $2 billion, 1.5 in foundation aid. And I hate to say it, but I got this kind of, you're divorced from reality response from a couple of the leaders there. And I know that it's a heavy lift, and there are other budgetary obligations, and it's a year when a deficit is looming, but I think it's going to be a tough year.
Well, I do too, and as I said, I think that there's constraints that are coming, not just within the state, but certainly the federal government, the new tax law, and the SALT provisions there.
The cap on state and local tax deductions?
And I think that because of New York's tax structure, that's going to affect, obviously, many people across New York State. And I know the governor's working very hard to come up with some options that take away some of that pain.
Yes.
But the reality is it's a tough year, and I'm certainly not advocating less than I think we can manage, but it does require everybody to think differently about what we have available. There are some key things, though. I mean, besides the 1.25, we're also requesting an increase in the reimbursable aid. So things like transportation and other things that districts are reimbursed for, we think that should be increased. And so we put that in our request as well.
Yeah, thinking about the governor's executive budget proposal, not only was that $770 million in additional state aid not exactly where we need to be, and of course, you peel that on down to actual foundation aid figure, it's much lower than that.
About half.
Yeah, but he also had a couple other things in there that I know we've talked about, and I'd like to get your take on this. One of them would be for the Big Five, starting with the Big Five, later expanding to other districts, to have their budgets approved by the State Education Department and the Division of Budget.
Well, that is not a position that I'm supporting.
Yeah.
As the commissioner and as the head of that very large agency. First of all, we're not in a position that in any timely way we could respond when a budget was submitted to us to get it out and get it back quickly. And if there needed to be changes, the changes be made, get it done. That just isn't how this state functions. I am a proponent of local control wherever it's possible and reasonable to move everybody forward in that community. We have elected officials and school board members that you work for.
Right.
And they're elected by the people of that community to do the job of being school board members and to run the district and approve the budget.
Yeah.
There's no question that if we saw that a particular school was having difficulty because of what was allocated to them, we would bring that up to a local school board and a school district and their superintendent and talk through that. The concept of just a blanket approval for districts because of size, I think, is problematic.
Well, I appreciate you going on record and saying that, because that was something that our members just find as a very slippery slope that could eventually get into a whole new way of doing business with the state, in our mind, overreaching, not because you wanted to see it, but because others might. Also, one of our arguments against that is the fact that ESSA, our new approved plan, which I want to ask you about, contains within it this requirement that we will have to report out cost per pupil.
And so we're putting a team together of financial professionals from around the state. They'll be working with us to develop a template. That template will reflect the expenditures at every school that will include federal, state, and local money.
Yeah.
And so they'll break out of that and some of these circumstances that give I think, a good picture of each school and perhaps why one school has a higher allocation from the district than another. I think those are all necessary things that we're going to be working on doing. But clearly, the ESSA plan has that as a required component, and it's for financial transparency. And so when you're thinking financial transparency, it, I think, gets to the issue that the governor has suggested, that people need to know how money is being spent, and they will know.
I want to make sure, just as you do, that we spend our money where it's needed most.
Absolutely.
That there is an equitable distribution, and we are getting our money's worth. Taxpayers are getting their money's worth, and kids are learning, and they're being successful beyond graduation. I'm telling the folks that I work for, be thinking about now, what's that report going to look like, and what is going to be the reaction from your community to the data that's going to be in that report? And as you think about that, now go on back to where you're putting your budget together and plan your budget accordingly.
I think process is very important, and I particularly think it's important in a state like New York, where people really want to be part of the problem solving that goes on in school districts to support children.
Yes.
And so you and the school board members across the state will have representation on kind of an overall committee that'll be looking at that. We're going to go out across the state and have focus groups to get feedback on how people understand and what we have to do to make sure they understand this form that we put together that will be online for everyone. The one good thing about it, Tim, is it's going to be consistent across the state.
Well, that's good. And speaking of the ESSA plan, I don't know where we are as far as how many have been approved nationwide, but as you look at it, and congratulations on the approval.
Thank you.
Are there some highlights in there that you're most proud of, things that you think that are really going to be really advantageous to public schools here in the state?
I think there's 2 or 3 things. First of all, the ESSA plan has been developed on the concept of equity as kind of being our driving force for it. And you see connections to equity in all of the recommendations that have been put in ESSA. The reality is that we have some school districts that are not equal to other school districts. And for our students in New York, our goal is to make sure that all students in New York, regardless of where they are and what district they're in, have access to quality education that'll lead to an outcome for them that gets them ready for the rest of their life.
Yep.
And so that's an important part of it. So we've been approved now. Now the big issue is we've got to implement.
Right.
And so this ESSA actually defines a new system of accountability.
Yep.
And I think that what people will, as we roll this out more and more, and many people across the state, as you know, have had opportunities to give feedback on this, but it's not just accountability based on 2 tests, ELA and math. It has a number of factors. We have listened carefully to practitioners across the state and tried to put as many of those in place in our system. And we know, and our regents are very clear, that they want to ultimately have the opportunity to add to some of those items so that you can look at a school and or a district and say, here are some really great things that they're doing. Here's some areas that they need to improve, and we want to be able to help them to do that.
And I think by expanding the criteria that are going to be looked at, and it's important not just to make sure that we find something good to say about everybody, but those are important criteria. That's what makes a school system really work, the things that you put in there, and it's not this blame and shame approach that we've had in the past.
Well, and I think we have to get beyond that. That has narrowed really the opportunities that students have, because people have focused only on those things that, from a narrow perspective, have been counted in the accountability system. And I think we've got to expand that. Our system does do that, and I would anticipate in the next several years there'll be additional changes.
I think the challenge is still going to be, and I'm not trying to take issue with what you've got, but I think it is going to be that we don't water it down too much.
I agree.
We got to have things we can actually measure that are legitimate, and I'm hoping that those measurements stay in place.
Well, they will have to stay in place because the law requires. There are some things under the ESSA that are still required that were required before, things like assessments.
Well,
so
there you go.
Standardized assessments across New York State are required by the federal law.
Right.
And so we still have to do that. It's the other things that we've added, I think, that give a better picture.
I've heard you talk about the way in which you're handling a 4-year plan to deal with opt-outs. And we know we have probably the highest opt-out rate in the nation. I think you have made a very conscious effort to listen and to make adjustments. I've heard your litany of the things that you and the regents have approved to make this test more meaningful, more legitimate, more reasonable, accommodating kids' needs, accommodating a lot of the critics, and I think appropriately so. And my hope would be that someday people start to say, you know what, this is okay now. This is not a gotcha sort of situation. This is using a test to help inform instruction and to help professional teachers have a better idea of what they're going to need to do in order to help their students achieve.
Well, you know, there's been standards since 1647.
Right.
There have been assessments once those standards were put in to know how well students are doing and what teachers need to change. So this is part of the education process, really. We just, we have made substantial changes in our testing program.
Right.
Including, I think, one of the most influential will be the fact that we went from a 3-day ELA and a 3-day math to a 2-day ELA and a 2-day math. And that was one of the major complaints that we heard from across the state from parents as well as our teachers and our administrators. So we've adjusted that, and we've put teachers as the writers of the assessments, and we're really focusing on what we can do as we move forward. And have some waivers in place in Washington. We're still pushing for some waivers that'll affect some of our special populations, but I do think that we have tried to respond to issues that have been clarified for us on the assessments that we do in New York.
I think you have. I think the new generation standards have been put in place, and honestly, I have not heard pushback. You know, after all we went through regarding Common Core and everyone's hair was on fire, I have not heard anything about these new generation standards except they're there. And that's you know, the temperatures come way, 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 way down, and that's a beautiful thing.
We've been working very hard to have that happen.
I know you have.
And I think we still have work to do.
Yeah, of course. But, I mean, the fact that that's just not out there bubbling like the Common Core was is huge. And then I do believe you're giving it time for the curriculum to be put in place, the teachers to feel very comfortable in teaching to these standards, and having tests that are around this that are reasonable, and it's not a gotcha, and it's not the only measurement. There's going to be a variety of things that you're looking at. I think you're putting in place a really, really good system, and I congratulate you on that.
Well, thank you. I have a great staff at SED. We're working really hard to be responsive to people's comments to us. And you know, we can't please everyone, but
Sure.
I think it's important for us to really be in a mode of listening first.
Well, speaking of not pleasing everyone, one of those issues that you and I have talked about many times is the annual professional performance reviews, APPR. Mm-hmm. And we have a moratorium in place now. Mm-hmm. In fact, we were on the governor's task force together where that moratorium was recommended and approved. And now it's going to come to an end potentially, and a new APPR system has to be put in place. I know you're trying to make this right, make it something that everybody can get their arms around and say, all right, that's a legitimate set of criteria and responsibilities that I should be held responsible, I, a teacher or principal, should be held responsible for. It's not, again, intended to be this gotcha. Mm-hmm. But we know that there's resistance to almost any APPR. NYS, the New York State United Teachers, have said, we don't want any APPR that is state mandated. We want to have it done at the local level.
What I can say is we have a law. Mm-hmm. The law had a number of changes over a 5-6 year period. Mm-hmm. The most recent was in 2015. Right. And then, and what was put in place as a result of that law that passed caused, I think, and legitimately concern from teachers. As you pointed out, we put a moratorium in place. The regents voted that in December of 2015. And what we're doing now is really using the process that we used to, as you pointed out earlier, to take the heat down and the pressure down. We've been very thoughtful about hearing what people across this state have to say and what they think are reasonable movements as we go forward. And so the first thing that we're doing is a survey. Yep. Now, there are going to be people that say, I don't want anything to do with APPR, it should be gone. They can send us the survey, and they can, everywhere they need to, they can give us that feedback. I really believe that the process that we've used multiple times in the state of New York that's helped us to move forward can be used in this same time period, and that APPR is something that we can collaborate with teachers and with educational leaders and come up with a plan for an evaluation that actually is supportive of improvement.
I agree.
I think we can do this. It just wasn't done that way before.
Right.
And I think where we need to be now is we need to be in this mode of using the process that's been positive, start with our survey, put together teams of people, get more and more feedback. The survey is the first of multiple instruments that we will use and approaches that we'll use to get feedback. This probably is not the first survey we'll do. We'll put things out for comment. We will have focus groups. We'll have hearings. We'll have meetings across the state. All of those things will allow people to say what they think would be a productive approach for teacher evaluation.
Does it have to be done the same way in every school district? And I'll play devil's advocate. If there were some standards that said, here were the performance levels we would expect of teachers, in line with the teaching standards, and now you at the local level figure out a way in which you're going to evaluate teachers against those standards, that would make sense to me. If it becomes where one size must fit all, I could see where some critics are going to come forth.
Well, and let me point out how critical people would be if I were to say right now what I think it should be.
Yeah.
Because my role right
you
now
can't
is
do
to
that.
listen to everyone.
Right.
And to say, I don't know what it should be, but let's figure this out together.
Yeah.
And let's have the teachers and those principals and assistant principals who are evaluated with this, let them tell us what they think are the best ways for them to become better at what they do every day.
But I would tell you that the concept you've already said is we want to use this for professional development. We want to use this for positive development. That in and of itself is a great starting point, because I think the critics would tell you that in the past it seemed to be used for a way in which we could say, gotcha. And how can we get you out of here as quickly as possible if you're not living up to standards? We would rather have this as a professional development tool.
I think all that has to be part of these discussions, right?
Yeah.
And really, you know, we're just at the very, very, very beginning of that. We've put the survey out.
Yeah.
I have done a letter to teachers across the state asking them personally to go on and to give us this feedback. I think it can be helpful for us if they do, and I hope they do.
Yep.
I'm asking superintendents and principals to give time in a teacher's day for them to do this, so that they have some set aside time from somewhere in a teacher meeting or whatever that actually says, do this.
The only thing I'm going to tell you is I hope we don't get it to the point where it's Lake Woebegone and everybody is highly effective and there's no chance for management to say, listen, there are certain people in our classroom, based on the evaluation and other things that have been observed, you just need to go find a job somewhere else. You don't belong here. It may be that we can correct that, we can professionally develop, and all of those sort of things. That would be the place to start. But there are going to be times when we're going to reach a point where we say, not here, not with our kids.
Well, and I think those are the things that we all have to be very focused on.
Yeah.
We are in this for students, for student success.
Right.
And so when you start focusing on what's the best thing for the students, and by the way, their teachers who are absolutely critical of the student's success is the teacher being supported in their school and in their classroom. When we talk through this with the adults that care greatly about their students, I think we can come up with something that really supports continuous improvement.
Now, you have right now a comment period underway in which you are suggesting that we measure instructional time, or you, I should say, the Board of Regents, have put forward a proposal that we would measure instructional time somewhat differently than what we've done traditionally, and even the possibility that we could have school days before September 1st in which we would get state aid for that. What's happening during this comment period?
Well, we're getting comments.
Okay.
That's a good thing. So people are looking at the suggested changes. I would say to you that our purpose was to focus on making sure we were having instructional time and that we gave as much flexibility as possible in the use of that instructional time. So we have done that, I think. We've had lots of opportunities for input again. We went out, had meetings across the state, and used our stakeholders, groups, everywhere to figure out how can we make this better. A majority of the school board members supported allowing classes to start before September.
Yeah,
And
they like that idea.
Well, you know, that is going to have to be a legislative issue.
Sure.
And if they choose to change the law, right now that's not the case. But I think that it's important for school districts who are reflective of their own communities to have flexibility.
Well, that's what I like.
That's what we would really want to have happen.
That's what I like about doing it in hours instead of days, because I'm imagining, okay, I've used up all of my emergency days, and I got to take one more because of an emergency, and I got to make that one up. And in the old days, it'd be made up in the spring break, made up in the summer, and everybody's angry at you. But I could now do maybe 2 hours, an hour and a half here.
Or half days.
Half day.
You know,
We can. It is a good way.
There's no question this opens up flexibility for districts.
Yeah. Last couple things I'm just going to mention. You have graduation rates just came out,
That's right.
and looks like we're making some progress, slow but surely.
Mm-hmm.
You feeling good about that?
Well, we're at 80.2% for our graduation rate for the 2013 cohorts. So these are the kids that started ninth grade in 2013 and they just graduated.
Yeah.
And if you look at where we are with the August rate, we actually go up by almost 2 points to 82.1%. And the bigger picture, if you step back and say, okay, how have we been doing over the last 10 years? We actually have gone up 11.6% in 10 years.
That's a really important message to kind of leave with people, because that's a big number.
It definitely is. We were at 68.6.
Yeah.
And we are now up at 80.2. So I'm saying to you that those movements are in the right direction. But let me also say that one of the things that's critical for us to keep in our mind is that we are seeing this upward trend, and we still have a major achievement gap between our African American and white peers and our Hispanic and their white peers. Right. I mean, we have to draw attention to it because we have to address it. Right. And the data is really critical to drive decisions that your membership as school board members need to make.
Well, this goes back to our resource allocation conversation. Well, there's a million topics I want to talk to you about. I'm sure that the people who are watching this are going, hey, Kremer, when are you going to ask her about? And I'm not going to get to that because we've run out of time. But it is been a pleasure. I hope you'll come back and maybe we'll pick up on this list someday. But thank you for all that you do for kids and school board members and communities and parents throughout this state. I think people really have come to admire all the work that you're doing. I know you're probably the hardest working person I know in the state right now, so thank you for this.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks to my guest, New York State Education Commissioner MaryEllen Elia. If you're looking for more information on state education programs, we have provided a link on our YouTube page. Thanks for watching. And see you next time for another edition of Newsmaker.